Nearly everyone has felt it at some point, that sudden, irrational unease the moment the lights go out. Not based on any actual evidence of real danger, just a feeling. This deeply ingrained fear has a genuinely fascinating evolutionary and biological explanation, one that reveals just how much our ancient past still quietly shapes our modern, everyday experience. Start with basic human biology, since it sets up everything else in this story. Human eyes simply aren't built for low-light conditions the way many other animals' eyes clearly are. We rely heavily on cone cells for color vision and fine visual detail, and cone cells need a reasonable amount of available light to function properly at all. As available light drops, we shift toward rod cells instead, which are considerably more light sensitive but produce a noticeably blurrier, colorless, lower resolution overall picture of the surrounding world. Compare this to a cat or an owl, animals whose eyes evolved specifically for hunting effectively in near total darkness, and the underlying difference becomes genuinely stark. In the dark, human beings are, quite literally, one of the least visually capable animals in the entire surrounding ecosystem. That specific biological limitation carried real, serious life-or-death consequences throughout most of our species' history. For hundreds of thousands of years, before reliable fire and secure permanent shelter were consistently available every single night. Our ancestors lived in environments genuinely full of dangerous large predators, big cats, hyenas, and wolves among them. Predators that were not only individually more physically dangerous than us, but critically, considerably better equipped to hunt effectively after sunset. A human standing in open terrain at dusk with rapidly weakening vision. Surrounded by animals whose own vision and hearing were only sharpening as the light faded, occupied a genuinely vulnerable evolutionary position. Given that specific backdrop, a fear of darkness wasn't some kind of irrational psychological quirk at all. It was a completely rational, adaptive response to a real, statistically significant threat. Individuals who felt genuinely uneasy in the dark, who sought shelter, huddled together with others, or stayed close to fire once fire became reliably available, were simply more likely to survive the night and successfully pass on whatever underlying genetic or behavioral tendencies had produced that specific caution in the first place. Evolution doesn't require every single individual case to matter directly. It only needs the overall average outcome, repeated across countless successive generations, to consistently favor caution over simple indifference. This is where a specific concept researchers sometimes call the agency detection system becomes genuinely relevant to this whole story. Human cognition appears to be wired with a strong underlying bias toward assuming that ambiguous sensory input, a sudden rustle in nearby bushes, an unexplained moving shadow, was caused by something possessing genuine intention. A predator, an enemy, some kind of deliberate agent, rather than simply being the wind or a falling branch instead. This particular bias makes complete practical sense from a straightforward cost-benefit standpoint. If you hear a rustling sound and wrongly assume it's a predator, the cost of that specific mistake is minor, a brief, harmless spike of unnecessary adrenaline. But if you hear that exact same rustling sound and wrongly assume it's nothing at all, when it actually is a genuine predator, the cost of that particular mistake can very easily be your own life. Darkness compounds this same underlying agency detection bias in a genuinely specific way because it strips away the visual confirmation that would normally resolve ambiguity fairly quickly. During daylight hours, a strange sound can usually be identified within just a second or two. A quick glance toward the source is often more than enough to fully settle the matter. At night, that same confirmation step is unavailable, or at least severely degraded, meaning the uncertain, threat-assuming interpretation of a given sound lingers considerably longer than it otherwise would in daylight, sometimes persisting for the entire duration of a given encounter. There's also a well-documented phenomenon called pareidolia that plays directly into this exact same dynamic. Pareidolia is the tendency of the human visual system to perceive meaningful, often specifically face-like patterns in random or genuinely ambiguous visual stimuli, a phenomenon that becomes considerably more pronounced under low-light conditions, where the brain has meaningfully less reliable visual data available to work with. A coat casually draped over a chair, a random cluster of shadows cast by nearby tree branches, can, under dim or flickering light, suddenly seem to resolve into something resembling a crouching figure or a watching face. This isn't a sign of a malfunctioning brain at all. It's actually a sign of a brain doing precisely what evolution originally shaped it to do. Cultural evolution layered directly on top of this same deep biological foundation and arguably amplified it considerably further still. Nearly every documented human culture throughout recorded history has produced some version of nighttime folklore involving dangerous supernatural beings that specifically emerge, or become dangerous, only after dark. This kind of independent, repeated convergence across cultures with no meaningful historical contact whatsoever is generally treated by anthropologists as fairly strong evidence that these stories weren't simply arbitrary cultural inventions, but rather functioned as a kind of practical, transmissible survival technology, encoded as vivid, emotionally gripping narratives a young child could actually remember and take genuinely seriously after hearing it just once or twice. Fire itself deserves specific, dedicated attention here because its controlled use fundamentally reshaped the entire relationship between early humans and nighttime danger, likely more than any other single technology in our early history. Once humans could reliably keep a fire burning safely through the night, predators were generally deterred, visibility within the immediate camp area improved enormously, and fire created a natural, shared gathering point for social connection during precisely the hours when isolation would have otherwise felt most dangerous and psychologically vulnerable. It's also genuinely worth directly addressing why this specific fear persists so stubbornly today, in a modern world where nighttime predation by large animals is effectively a non-issue for most people. Modern psychology generally treats this persistence not as some kind of outdated evolutionary glitch, but as straightforward. Expected evidence of exactly how evolution tends to work in general, biological adaptations shaped carefully over hundreds of thousands of years simply don't disappear or get meaningfully rewritten within the mere handful of generations, historically speaking, that separate us from reliable modern electric lighting. There's a revealing detail buried in modern sleep and anxiety research that connects directly back to this same deep evolutionary history. Studies measuring skin conductance, a common physiological proxy researchers use for underlying stress and arousal levels, have consistently found that many people show measurably elevated readings in darkness compared to identical, carefully matched lighting conditions, even when the specific person being tested reports absolutely no conscious feeling of fear whatsoever at the time of testing. This suggests at least part of this response operates well below the threshold of full conscious awareness, a kind of quiet background vigilance the nervous system simply doesn't fully switch off. Regardless of how objectively safe a given modern environment actually happens to be, children specifically tend to experience heightened fear of darkness at a very particular, fairly predictable stage of early development, generally somewhere between roughly 2 and 6 years of age, and developmental psychologists have proposed a fairly compelling explanation for exactly why that specific age window shows up so consistently across cultures. This is roughly the same developmental period during which a child's imagination and general capacity to vividly picture hypothetical scenarios are rapidly maturing, well ahead of the child's still developing capacity to reliably distinguish purely imagined possibilities from genuine, concrete, currently present threats. Modern urban environments offer a genuinely interesting further wrinkle to this same overall pattern. Despite being dramatically safer from large predator attack than any ancestral environment ever was, poorly lit city streets and unfamiliar neighborhoods encountered after dark still reliably trigger measurably elevated anxiety in a large share of people. Some researchers have argued this represents the exact same ancient underlying threat detection system simply being redirected toward a genuinely different, more statistically realistic modern source of risk, while still operating according to the exact same basic underlying logic that shaped it many thousands of years ago. The specific things that once genuinely hunted us in the dark are, for the vast majority of people,